the GSA Data Center Sustainability Summit. I'll introduce Dan Rattner. He's the VP at Iron Mountain. And I'll give it to you, Dan. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tom. And greetings, everybody. I'm Dan Rattner. I'm Vice President of Global Risk, Sustainability, and Government Programs at Iron Mountain Data Centers. So my teams oversee our physical security, our cybersecurity, compliance, sustainability, and then I have a role in helping to manage our relationships with our government customers. I'm joined today by Jim Henry, who's part of my team and is the Senior Manager of Risk Compliance and Quality Management for IMDC, and also Jamie Holcombe, the CIO from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Just to give a little context of Iron Mountain Data Centers and our federal business approach. So Iron Mountain's a 70-year-old company. Most folks know it for the trucks and our hard copy storage and our shredding and the business that we've been in. But several years ago, we really, as part of digital transformation, took a good look at where our customers were going and where we needed to be for the future. And that's really what gave birth to the fastest growing part of the company, which is the data center business. And in terms of our federal footprint, just focusing for a minute on domestic, on US, we really look at it in three ways. We look at requirements that agencies and entities have inside the national capital region, and so we respond to that with a much growing footprint in Manassas, Virginia. Eventually that site will be 8 data center buildings. And then the second piece of the requirements come from agencies and entities that are looking for something that's outside the national capital region or the blast zone, but need to be within driving distance. And so we have a facility that in north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that is a highly secure facility. It's about 1.8 million square feet of space, 220 feet underground. It's in an old limestone mine. And then the third tranche of the requirements are things that for resiliency reasons and other reasons need to be off the East Coast power grid. So we have locations in Arizona. We also have a site in Denver, and we've got some other smaller data centers in the Midwest of the country. And then our overall portfolio is global. So we're in Asia, we're in Europe, and that's kind of the growth of the data center business in the company. The title of the session is the mission and environmental benefits of co-location data centers. And simply put, the mission is to provide solutions for the data center challenges that our customers are facing, and to do those in a manner that's both respectful of the planet and also in a collaborative approach with the communities in which we operate. And that sounds really great on paper, but it's like, so what does that actually mean, and particularly with respect to our government customers? So Jim, let me start with you. So for several years now, IMDC has operated our entire global portfolio on 100% renewable energy. And more recently, we broadened our focus to look at water, to look at how we deal with waste. Take a few minutes, please, and talk a little bit about what that means.
Since 2017, Iron Mountain Data Center has been powered by 100% renewable energy. And for us, really the story behind that, and this was 5 years ago, so the colo industry was totally different then. This was before a lot of public commitments were out there. Obviously as an organization, having the forethought to not only go 100% then, but to even have a goal around that renewable energy target was a big deal. It still is, and there's a lot of organizations striving to get to that level of many different scales. So for us, what that means is that not only are we operating responsibly in the communities that we're working in, but we're trying to contribute to the industry itself as being someone who can advocate for, we've been there, we've gotten to 100%, and all of our peers too, amongst us, we're all scaling as well. I don't think any of us have any idea to scale back the energy consumption we have. So all we can do is be more responsible with how not only are we sourcing it, but then being energy efficient too. So just to break that down a little bit more, as we've scaled the business, this isn't rocket science, but it's not the simplest thing to do, because purchasing renewable energy via either RECs or VPPAs, contributing to the assets that are generating that energy is primarily one of the principal concerns when you're looking at the renewable asset itself. So for us, sourcing those renewable power credits or working that VPPA in as much of a localized manner as possible is really important. So, we talked about the underground in Western Pennsylvania a little bit earlier. Those allocations for that site, for example, we allocate those all of that renewable energy from a wind farm that's actually in Pennsylvania. It's actually about two hours, give or take, from the underground. So, what that really means for us is that we're making the effort to contribute to assets that give back to the communities that we operate in. And then for our customers, it gives them the flexibility and the peace of mind to know that we're operating in a way that they would want to operate if they were operating their own data center. Because of course, like you said, Dan, really for colo, what we're trying to emulate is if you were doing it yourself, you would want to do it as good as you can. So we want to give the customers the confidence that the quality is there. We're operating responsibly, sourcing renewable energy, and then of course there's a whole different paradigm around utilizing that energy in a responsible way with energy efficiency, which I'm sure we'll talk more about later. But in terms of being renewable, it's a journey, it's continual, because as you scale more and you deploy more megawatts, obviously you have to respond to that with more renewable energy. So for us, that mechanism to pass through the renewable energy to our customers was the next frontier after becoming 100% renewable. So we launched what I would call our one of the coolest things that I've ever been a part of, the Green Power Pass product, which enables us to have an independent third-party audit firm take a look at all of our renewable energy that we source, that we purchase, look at that against our load, our deployed megawatts, and then give our customers attestations of how much they've utilized in our data centers and how they can claim that against their scope 2, scope 3 when they do their carbon disclosures for the year. And that's really a game changer. So from soup to nuts, between becoming, having that track, having that road to become 100% renewable, sourcing it responsibly, using it responsibly, and passing it to our customer, from soup to nuts, that's really how we do it. And it means a lot to us in our communities.
That's great, Jim. One of the things that we've learned in our interactions with government customers, and it's really, we focus a lot on highly regulated industries. So the government, financial services industry, and healthcare, hospitals, and related. And one of the things that we've realized I think is a differentiator for us is that it's not a one size fits all. And Jamie, certainly in working with PTO now in September, it'll be 20 years that PTO has been a data center customer for Iron Mountain. Earlier on one of the panels, Ann Durkin and her panelists were talking about listening. And that's really one of the things that we focus on. We don't want to be a product company. We want to be a solution company. And so working with CIOs, CISOs, with their teams, most importantly, to understand the specifics of the challenges. So Jamie, talk a little bit, if you would, about what's important to you and your teams and your experience a little bit with Iron Mountain.
Well, thanks for the opportunity and thanks for having me. The Iron Mountain solution set was really key to our resiliency efforts. I was brought on in part to ensure that the United States Patent and Trademark Office continued operations no matter what happened. Unfortunately, we have a data center in Alexandria, and our lowest levels are prone to flooding by the Eisenhower Avenue stream. And so sometimes the power can go out. Well, that's unacceptable to continued operations. So what we tried to do was ensure for the resiliency by updating our data center in the new location you were talking about in Manassas. So we went from the old backup site to the new Manassas data center, and it's so good that, and you listened so well to the solutioning and the resiliency, that we're taking our current Alexandria data center at 31,500 square feet, and we're reducing to a footprint that will be less than the 10,000 square feet that we're leasing in a colo managed service way from Iron Mountain. Now, we're also going to go out to the cloud. So that is a natural progression because the internet seemed to go by the PTO like 20 years ago and it never looked back. So I'm trying to catch up on all these things. And we have a really competent staff who is now solutioned with the Iron Mountain staff to create a brand new modernized infrastructure, which can move on throughout the 20th century. So we're out of that and in the 21st century finally, and we're looking over the horizon in 2030 and beyond. But if anybody says that they can predict what will happen 3 years from now, that's crazy talk. As Jim was saying, 5 years ago, the data center business industry was totally different than it is today. So I like your part about solutioning because that's what it's all about. And why would any government agency, unless it's DISA or the infrastructure guys, want to manage their own operations when you can outsource it and have a partner like Iron Mountain accept all the capital expenses, and then you get new and improved stuff all the time without having to worry about it, as long as it's part of your agreement and contract. Remember, it's not so much what, but how you're going to implement and how you future proof for that over the horizon in 2030 and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the SLAs are critical. The agreement, the early discussions about what are the requirements are very, very important. And also, you talk about over the horizon. One of the things that we're very focused on is looking at from a security perspective, from an overall threat perspective, from an emerging energy perspective, what's coming. And if, for example, one of the areas, and you know this, Jamie, that we're now very focused on is the emerging EMP threat. And what does that mean for sustainability? What does that mean for resiliency? What does it mean for the threat to the power grid? And for us in our own operations and developing solutions for our customers. Jim, there's a question in here about the continuing evolution of the energy requirements in RECs and going from sort of an annual agreement to looking at monthly to looking at hourly. And can you talk a little bit about how that's evolved for us and some of the things that you've been working on with our partners?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. I think I figured out the double, triple mute situation. But the next frontier for renewable energy is moving from an aggregate 100% per year or over a 12-month period to a real-time matching of renewables coming to the sites. Now this, I could get into the weeds, but essentially there's a couple key points that you need before you can do this. And there's very few organizations that have committed to doing this so far. We're one of them. And again, it's the first challenge is, you need to have a provider or providers that can partner with you on this. And then of course, folks that can partner with them in order to calculate the load coming from the grid that's matching your site. And then of course, at the site level, you have to have power quality meters that can match that load and validate it on an hour by hour basis or whatever your polling rate's going to be. But it's really a lot harder than it sounds because you do need to have those attestations from the utility providers that will tell you how much load is coming from which substations, which sites, hour by hour, so that you can match that back to your own site. Going a lot more granular than that is probably a little bit deeper than we want to go on this conversation. But essentially what that means is that you're accounting, you know, the sun doesn't shine at night. We all know that, but you're accounting for that nighttime load with renewable energy that's produced. Obviously, if you can do it on site, great, but doing that for a data center is pretty hard when you've got a 20, 30, 40 megawatt data center. So you have to have and find partners that can equip you with that renewable energy to cover that nighttime load. And then, of course, during the day when that load's not active as well. So it really gets a lot deeper than that, more complicated. But for us, one of the things and ways that we're tracking that is through our energy management system. So, I could probably put tidbits of this in and out of this session off and on, but we track all of our renewable energy and energy efficiency through our ISO 50001 energy management system. That's one of the ways that we're going to track this too, is how much of 100% do we accomplish 24/7? And this will be the first year that we start reporting on that internally, and then externally too. That'll be a big part of our story. And for our customers, that's going to become primarily one of the next frontiers for them too. So if you're already doing business with Iron Mountain and you're getting that 100% renewable attestation, it's going to be even more confidence in your operations now that you end up going with a 24/7 match, because it is difficult, it is complicated. In certain parts of the world, this may not be something that you can do for a number of years. It just depends on the infrastructure and the utilities that are operating.
Thanks, Jim. Jamie, one of the questions somebody had is around measurements and how you're capturing the conservation energy as a result of the strategy that you've got working with IMDC and your overall data center strategy.
Well, power consumption is only one. We are planning for max power consumption, but if we do use less, then of course we're going to benefit from that. The thing is, let's not forget, I did data centers before they were called cloud, right? So, you've got not just power, but you've got connect, you've got compute, and you've got climate, right? And so what Iron Mountain does is not just power. I mean, you have to consider the entire operations, especially for continuity. Smart hands is another big one. And you offer all of those solutions in a measurable way, where we have saved over 50% of our former operating costs, because we're actually moving out not only to the cloud, but also to colo. There are just some applications and servers that are just too old. If you can imagine, it's all based on your mission. And unfortunately, we have an old it's Algol program that's still containerized, and it is in the modern infrastructure, but it still operates as a black box, and we need to keep that going. I can't put that out in the cloud. I have to actually use a colo facility to, bring the modern benefits to it. So on the measures, we have KPIs, but the key performance indicators include all four areas, not just power generation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about the colo model, I often say we sell confidence, because particularly for a government agency or a company that is reluctant, has been reluctant to give up the control, because they don't want to lose the confidence that they will have the resiliency, that they will have the information available when they need it. And to do that by giving that up to a colo provider, there's got to be security to it. There's got to be power. There's got to be cooling. There's got to be support, the smart hands that you referenced, and that we're doing all that in a responsible way, so that our brand is accretive to the brand of the agency or the entity or the company that we're doing business with, because it is, after all, at the end of the day, your customers that you're serving, that we're taking on that responsibility for. So, we again try to work with you and others to figure out, what does that mean? What do you need? What do you need in terms of information? What do you need in terms of SLAs?
And I'd like to interject here that one of the big things I liked about Iron Mountain as well was their partnership, in effect, knowing that we didn't want vendor lock-in. So why is that important? I have a theory that for every McDonald's, you need a Burger King. For every Avis, you need a Hertz, right? And so it wasn't adverse. I didn't get the sticky conversation I had with Iron Mountain. They totally understood why I would want to go with another provider so that you would have that ability to move in between and keep the other guy competitive as well as up on the most recent things. You know, the misguided form of Jedi with only going with one managed service provider, I believe, was not optimal for the US government. And it's proven out because the protests and everything else. What we really need to do is competition, not just at the procurement level, but actually in the operational level. What we should have is good, smaller contracts where people are competing for our business and providing those things in a pros and cons way where you can see the benefits of ABC over XYZ Corporation and using those vendors to their strengths. One of the great strengths I believe that Iron Mountain has is the flexibility and adapting. As an example, you're carrier neutral. It doesn't matter. So I could bring in the commercial guys, or like I've done, I've brought in NOAA to VA2 Manassas. And I tell you what, there's no better carrier for the US government, Fed Civ, than NOAA's telecom services. It's called N-Wave, and damn is it good. I get 4 times the bandwidth at 1/3 the cost. How can you argue in a business sense? You can't. Now, some other people have other requirements, and it's always good to have a commercial backup. I got you. But NOAA's doing our good. So carrier neutrality is a big deal as well. So that whole thing about SLAs, making sure you know what the contract says, and you look over the horizon, you look at the future, but you keep your feet on the ground and make sure you're getting the operational metrics that we talked about in the entire way for continuity of operations.
Yeah, one of the biggest things I think that, at least when we talk about the industry as a whole now too, is that, you know, Jamie, as you're describing this, we're making each other better. So obviously this is an incredibly competitive industry. It's probably one of the most competitive times right now that we've had in the last 6, 7, 8 years. And with that being said, for you to meet your mission, for other agencies to meet their missions, distributing the risk, distributing the load is an obvious, right? I mean, we've got to breed that competition, breed the kind of the sense of we need to make each other better. Because at the end of the day, one of the biggest things that I know in talking to you and talking to others right now is you're moving out of antiquated data centers and computer rooms and other things. You want that, you know, that tier 3 rated 3 data center. You want the resiliency, transparency of security procedures and practices. And then we all know that there's the elephant in the room in every conversation. There's standards that you have to meet. And I could talk at length about how many contracts I've looked at where, you know, we need to meet the NIST requirements and other things. So for us, from our perspective, one of the greatest things that obviously I've been able to talk with you and other peers about is that, you know, when you have to sit down and meet standards for your own auditors, your internal, you know, customers, so to speak, is that we're enabling you with that confidence and transparency. Because when you're looking at the environment now as it is, there's so many options, there's so many products, there's so many strengths. So making the best decision based on transparency, quality, and confidence is really our mission, because we take the principle of treat others as you would treat, you know, yourself, and we like to treat you the way we would treat our own data center, and it really it becomes a partnership.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned N-Wave, Jamie. You know, it's a good example of that responsiveness. You know, we also in Manassas, we armed our security team as a result of a requirement from one of our federal customers. All of our security officers across all of our portfolio in the U.S. are Iron Mountain employees. We don't use contractors because of the security requirements and the clearance requirements that we encounter, not only on the government side, but again, with our financial services customers. And it's really important to us to understand what's driving the future for our customers so that we can build and design our facilities, build and design our operations to be proactive and responsive to that. Jim, take a second and just talk a little bit about what we're doing with DOE and EPA, some of the new initiatives around sustainability.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the other thing too. If you take a stroll in downtown DC, you know, you'll see a number of federal buildings that are Energy Star certified, and Iron Mountain Data Centers has been a part of the Department of Energy's Better Buildings Challenge for, I think, 6 or 7 years now. We've been a goal achiever in that program. A number of folks from the national labs have developed great relationships with us. And, you know, that's kind of how we extend, again, that federal partnership. So with DOE, the Better Buildings Challenge, we're in the commercial building sector. We're always setting new goals around power usage efficiency, PUE, setting goals around water usage as well, WUE. And in addition to that, certifying the buildings under EPA's Energy Star program for commercial buildings, more specifically, you know, data centers. So in that effort, that's just another way, you know, bridging that gap, treating our building as if it were your own. Because again, if you're in a federal building, a lot of these buildings are part of federal programs anyway. They're Energy Star certified. They're in various federal challenges to meet goals that are set. So for us, taking that as an extension and taking it seriously to just make that partnership stronger, treating our building as if it were your own is kind of the way I've always looked at it. And we've developed really great relationships, learned a lot from other partners, other agencies over the last 6-7 years, and continue to work on projects and case studies with DOE and EPA.
Jamie, we're coming up on time. I know you got a tight schedule. Really appreciate your participating. Any final thoughts you want to share? Pearls of wisdom that you'd like to pass on?
Yeah, I always like to say it's a journey, and so there's a pre, a during, and a post. And during your pre, everybody's putting all the requirements on. Oh, we got to know what we need and everything else. No, you don't. One of the things that you got to require is the fact you don't know what's going to happen in 3 years. Make those CLINs available so that you take opportunities when you can. Make sure you're putting 20 or 30% on top of your budget to take advantage of those things as a capital expenditure or an investment, because they could save you 50% at the end. If you don't begin with the end in mind, and the only end in mind that you're going to be thinking of is adaptability. You either adapt and grow, or you wither and die. Those are my words of wisdom.
I don't think I can follow that. Thanks so much, Jim, Jamie, and thanks for the opportunity. Gordon, I guess I'll pass it back to you.